Allie with Potomac Beads. Join me in making this Thistle Pendant featuring a Rivoli in the middle and then blooming out. If you need any materials, remember to check the links below to shop with us online. Gather up your beads and let's get started. So to begin the design, I have some .006 wildfire beading thread and a size 12 needle, approximately 3.5 feet. If you want to do more of the little floral petals, you're going to want to keep in mind that you're going to want some more thread. On this, we're going to start with a traditional peyote bezel with Delica beads, and I'm using the Delica in the Opaque Mauve luster. I have 36 beads on the end of my thread here, and I'm going to take the end of the thread and I'm going to tie it into a knot. If you do not like that, you want to have a little bit of extra play, you can always use a stop bead as well. I'm going to tie it into a square knot, right over left and left over right. And then once you have that in the round, go ahead and give a nice tight pull. From here, I want my thread and needle to go away from the knot. So I'm going to take my thread and needle through the next couple seed beads. I happen to go 5 beads. The bead that I'm coming out, I'm going to entitle bead number 1. And what I'm going to do is, coming out of bead number 1, pick up another one of my 11 Delicas, skip over bead number 2, and sew through bead number 3. Now, since I started with 36 beads, I'm going to add, because I'm skipping one of each bead here, an additional 18 to this row. Coming out of bead 3, skip over 4, and go into bead number 5. As you go around the design, you're always going to be exiting through the odd number of 11 and adding a bead that sits next to the even number. You can see it's starting to grow right there with that 2, 1, 2, 1 pattern. I'm going to continue that the whole way around, adding in an additional 16 new 11 Delicas till I get back to my start. Once you're getting ready to add the last of your Delica beads, you're going to be coming out of the first bead, bead number 1, that your needle was originally exiting when you added the first of these 18 Delicas. What we're going to do now is step up. We're going to take our needle and thread through that first bead that we just added in this row of 18. I've put away the rest of my Delicas, and I've gotten in the 11 size, and I've gotten out a 15 Delica bead, and this is the opaque purple gray rainbow. I'm going to put on one of those between each one of my 18 beads that I added in what is that third row actually of my Peyote Stitch. As I add 18 new beads on this fourth row of 18, these are going to be pulled in tighter. The 15s naturally are smaller than the 11s, which is going to cause it to kind of cave in. What's going to happen then is that's going to create the back of my bezel in order to hold in my 14mm Rivoli. I want you to continue not once but 2 times around with your 15 Delica bead. As you come around and finish up, I have 3 on now. I have 15 more to go. After I do number 18, I'm going to go back through this bead number 1, step up through bead number 1 in that row of 15s, and do one more row of 18 15 Delica beads. As you proceed around the design, you're going to add your last of your 15 Delica in place, and as you do so, you can see I've already stepped up in the design. I'm going to give a nice tight pull. Make sure you're always pulling on your thread rather than at the needle, which will fray the thread that sits inside of the needle. So I've gone around and added 2 rows of the 15 Delicas, which pull in just enough to hold our 15 Rivoli, or size 14mm Rivoli in place. When I stepped up, I did so through the first bead in this row that I added. When you're counting peyote rows, so you know what row you're on, when you add the first row of 36 beads, that's actually 2 rows at once. We have 1 row, 2 row, 3, 4, and 5 that we've ended on. After giving a nice tight pull, what we're going to do is sew down the project. So I'm out bead number 1 from the 5th row, going down into bead number 2 of the 4th row, down into bead number 3 of the 3rd row, 2, and 1. So I'm coming the whole way down on that diagonal stitch, down through all of my purple beads till I get to the other side. At this point, again, give a nice tight pull, grab your Rivoli and sit it into the center of the design. You can see it'll sit there just ever so nicely right in the middle. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip over and add my beads to the front to hold the Rivoli in place. To add the beads into the front of the design, just like we did the back, I'm going to do 2 rows of the 15-0 Delicas. So I have my bead and thread coming out there on bead number 1 of my 11-0 Delica, and I'm going to proceed with 2 rows of 15-0 Delicas just like the back. Once I do so, it's going to create even more of that tire shape to hold that Rivoli in. By the time you do row number 2, you want to make sure your Rivoli is in place and you're starting with your hands to actually pinch it into that tire shape where you have each side of your 15-0s really hugging the sides of your crystal, like so. As our last step to tighten up and make sure the front stays tight and the back stays tight, what we're going to do is just like we did the other time, going from the back to the front, we're now going to go from the front all the way along on a diagonal line to the back. When we go to the back, you're going to pick up your 15-0 seed beads, and the 15-0 seed beads, we're going to do 1 pass around the back with the 15-0s. We're then going to bring ourselves out to the side of the Delica beads in the 11-0 to that center row that my thread is actually going through right now. And as I bring my thread back to that space, we'll start with our little petals, which can be endless and as many or as few as you like. So I'm going around here to the back. If you want to, you can also just take your thread and needle and sew right directly through all the 15s. That's an option. I don't want to see much thread, so I'm going to go through, coming out my last row of my 15s along the back. Grab my 15-0 seed beads in the blush lined crystal. Pick up 1 and sew through the next one in line. This will cover up the back and then also pull the design a little bit tighter. The nice thing as well is that it will cover up some of the silver on the back of the Rivoli. I know many of you have questions about the silver backing on all your different Rivolis. Some people will go ahead and use Permalac, a clear polish, to paint on the back, so that way it does coat the back a little bit so that it doesn't rub. The more rows you do, obviously, along the back and then start to actually downgrade, the more you can cover the whole entire piece. I'm just going to do 1 row around with my 15-0 Delicas, and then we're going to pop out to the sides. After you finish up with the back of the design, you're going to start to do your petals in the flower. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from darker to lighter as I progress to the outside of the flower. Once you're done stitching your back and going through those 15-0s, I want you to come out so your thread and needle are in the middle row of the Peyote Stitch in the band. That's going to be the middle row of the 11-0 Delicas. From there, you can play around a ton with your pattern. I'm going for a natural flower look that gets from darker to lighter as I go out in the petal. I have 3 of my Delicas in the 15-0 color in that opaque purple rainbow. I have 2 of my mauve in the 11-0. Then I have 3 15-0s, and these are in a light amethyst AB transparent Smokey. And then I have my 3 15-0s in that blush lined crystal. I've repeated that then the opposite way, going the opposite direction. And I have my thread and needle coming out bead number 1 there in that middle row. I'm going to skip over beads number 2 and 3, and I'm going to sew into bead number 4 in that same row and out. What that's going to do is to create that nice little petal look. From here, I'm going to repeat that same pattern of my 3 15s, my 2 11s, my 3 15s in my transparent amethyst, my 3 15s in my seed bead in the blush, 3 15 Delicas in that amethyst, 2 11s, and 3 of my darker 15 Delicas. Again, along the center line, 1, 2, 3. Take your needle through that single Delica there. Bring your thread and needle out, and you have petal number 2. You're going to progress around the flower, adding in more and more of the petals until we get a full row around this first loop. To increase our petal count around our flower, as you finish with your 6th petal, you're going to sew through that first Delica that you started your petals on. You can see it looks a little sad right now. I want you to sew back through the first row of Delicas there, and then you're going to sew into the second Delica. So remember, we skipped 2 Delicas this first row around when we added our 6 petals. We're going to add 6 more. This time we're going to be right at the Delica, right next to the first one that we skipped. So the first one we skipped now is going to be the one that we always go in. I'm going to add in 6 more petals and then do the same thing. We're going to skip to the other one that we're skipping over and add another row of our petals in. So go ahead now, once you're done with that first row of 6, skip back to that next open bead in that same center line and do another row of 6. So I'm adding in my last petal on this second row of my flowers, and just like we did here, instead of going into that next bead automatically, I want you to go to the front and go through the peyote stitch so you don't see any thread, and then go to the last open bead in this row of your peyote stitch. So now we're into that open bead, and we're going to go through and add another row of our petals to our flower. So once you're done going around and adding your 3rd row of your petals in, you can see the flower starting to take much more of a kind of vibrant shape with that darker and then going out. I'm coming up the last of my 15-0 bead in row number 2. Remember that center row that we did. And what we need to do is get to the back row of our 15s, or our 11-0 seed beads, and we're going to do the same thing. So instead, this time of sewing kind of down the same row towards the front, I'm going to take my needle and thread, just poke it to the back so that way it's on the back side. I didn't go through any beads. I just poked it right through. And I'm going to sew back so I'm coming out one of the back rows. Now, you guessed it, we're going to continue again. So if you want to, you can change up the coloring a little bit, and you can have it be darker, lighter. I'm going to make it really nice and simple and just do the exact same count as I go around and do the exact same setting on the back row of those 11-0s. So it's just a repetitive thing here. Add your pattern, skip over 1, 2, sew into 3, doing that once, twice, and 3 times around, doing 6 petals each time. You can stop at any time. You can say that's enough and have it end, or you can keep going and make it fuller and fuller. So along the back, you do the exact same thing, and I did all the rows. I did decide to increase 1 more 15 and 1 more of my 11-0 Delica, so that way those petals just sit a little bit slightly higher. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the center and go back to that first row of my Delica beads. Now you can stop. There's so many variations, and I love the idea of making this in different colors. It could look like a beautiful sunflower. You can actually do points on your flower, so really have fun with it. But now that I'm done with the back, what I'm going to do is sew through, come out through this first Delica here, and then once I'm through that first Delica there, I'm going to change up the pattern ever so slightly again. And all I'm going to do for this change up of my pattern is I'm going to decrease 1 bead in my 15-0 to the start. So it's just going to be 2 15s, 2 Delicas, 2 of my 11-0s, so everything's going to be 2 along that count, with the exception of the center, which will stay 3. So we're going to go to the front and do the whole thing again, adding in another row of petals along our thistle flower. Once you're finished adding the amount of petals that you wanted to the design, and you can see that it's fairly thick and just so happens nicely to match my nails, you can see that you can make this in all different sizes. My example piece that I did during one of the live Twitch events was a 12mm Rivoli. I stepped up to a 14 to make it a little larger. This would be a great necklace where you can add multiples in, a great hair piece, or even a barrette in addition to the pendant. Once you're done with the amount of petals that you want, you're just going to bring your thread and needle towards the back of the design and tie it off. One thing to keep in mind is if you do want to, at the top of one of your petals on that back row, you can add a wire guard or a wire protector and then go through and sew through that petal one more time, so that way you have 2 or 3 strands of thread going through wherever you're going to use as your connection point. Another idea with this pendant is to actually do a seed beaded bezel, or to look at the foxy necklace and look at this as part of your extension that would hang down from the individual bead clasp hanging from the front. The nice thing about this design, like I said, there's so many different options. You can go in and check out all the different supplies, make it so that it's a pendant, like I did here, about 2 inches across. You can do that hair barrette. You can do a nice earring too, even if you want to with that smaller design. You can see kind of how that makes it. Or then again, add them together along the collar of a necklace. I'll let you guys do that and challenge you to do so. I can't wait to see all the different designs. Remember, if you do need materials, check out the links below to shop with us online. In addition to that, make sure to give a little thumbs up if you like the video. Comment below with any questions, ideas, or anything that you think would help out to really expand the beading community and really create this awesome group of beaders that we have. Remember also, you can join our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. Show off your designs there and show me what kind of thistle or how you change it into a sunflower, a poppy, all different kinds of flowers that you can do. Remember also, if you haven't already, click that little button in the corner and subscribe so you get regular updates from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks everyone so much for watching. Hopefully this gave you lots of ideas, and enjoy making your new thistle pendant.